There was a time before writing, before cities, before memory had a place to stay. Human life moved lightly across the land. People gathered, they separated, they followed seasons rather than plans. Nothing was meant to last very long. Shelters were temporary. Tools were carried, not stored. The world was understood through movement. And yet, during this time, something was built to remain. Not a shelter, not a home, not a place meant for daily life. Stone was shaped, lifted, placed upright. And then, long after the hands that placed it had moved on, it stayed. What makes this moment difficult to understand is not the stone itself. It is the timing. These people did not farm. They did not keep animals. They did not write. They had no cities to anchor them, no fields to return to. And still, they gathered again and again to work on something that would not move. Tonight, we will not try to solve this place. We will not force meaning onto it. We will not search for hidden messages. Instead, we will slow down and observe what can be known without urgency. We know roughly when these stones were raised. We know how they were carved. We know the animals that appear upon them. We know the climate of the land, the plants that grew nearby, the rhythm of the seasons. What we do not know is just as important. We do not know why people who did not settle built something that demanded return. We do not know why effort was concentrated here rather than spread across daily survival. We do not know why, after generations of use, this place was carefully buried. Not destroyed, not abandoned, covered. These unanswered questions have made the site famous. But fame is not our concern here. Tonight, we are interested in something quieter. What kind of world allows a place like this to exist without explanation? What kind of people build without recording their reasons? What kind of time moves slowly enough to allow meaning without words? This is not a story about discovery. It is not a story about mystery. It is an examination of presence. A hill that was never empty, stones that were never meant to speak, people who did not rush to explain themselves. Modern life often assumes that understanding must come immediately, that meaning must be extracted. But this place does not respond to pressure. It remains calm under questions. It allows silence to do some of the work. As we move forward, we will stay close to what can be observed. The land, the stone, the human effort. We will avoid speculation. We will avoid drama. And we will allow uncertainty to remain where it belongs. Only now, after slowing down, after letting the noise settle, we can give this place its name. Today, we call it Göbekli Tepe. Let us begin by placing ourselves on the hill itself. Before this place had a name, it was already shaped, not by intention, but by time. Low hills rose gently from the surrounding plains. Shallow valleys carried seasonal water. The horizon remained open, uninterrupted by walls or roads. Nothing here announced itself as important. There were no markers, no borders, no signs that would later tell people where one world ended and another began. The land did not belong to anyone, and it did not need to. In this period, humans did not define space through ownership. They recognized places through familiarity. A hill was known because it returned each season. A valley was remembered because it provided shelter from wind. A horizon was trusted because it remained open. The area we now associate with Göbekli Tepe existed within this quiet geography. It was not isolated, nor was it central in any political sense. It was simply there, The soil carried traces of long movement. Animal paths crossed it without hesitation. Human footsteps followed similar lines, season after season. This was a world before labels, before regions were named, before maps tried to impose order. People moved through the land rather than across it. There was no sharp distinction between arrival and departure. One passed through, stayed briefly, and moved on. What mattered was not permanence, but recognition. The land did not ask to be understood. It did not demand explanation. It allowed itself to be known slowly. In such a world, a place did not need to stand out in order to matter. It only needed to remain, and this hill did. The climate of this land did not rush. Seasons arrived without sharp borders, moving gradually from warmth to cold, from dryness to rain. Long before calendars, people learned time by observing change, the angle of the sun, the length of shadows, the cooling of the air after dusk. This region stood at the edge of a shifting climate. The last echoes of colder periods were fading, but the world had not yet settled into stability. Rainfall was uncertain. Vegetation responded slowly. Animals followed patterns that could not be forced. Night arrived gently. There was no artificial light to interrupt it, no boundaries between day and dark. As the sun lowered, the land softened. Heat released its hold. Sounds diminished. Movement slowed. Darkness was not sudden. It unfolded. The sky dimmed first, then the ground. Then the details of distance disappeared. In this quiet transition, human activity adapted rather than resisted. Work ended when visibility faded. Gathering replaced movement. Attention turned inward. Night did not signal danger by default, it signaled pause. The cooler air made rest possible. Fire became central, not for spectacle, but for continuity. A single flame was enough. It defined space without enclosing it. It provided warmth without dominance. It allowed conversation to slow or to stop entirely. Under these conditions, time felt different. There were no hours to divide it. No need to measure what could be sensed. Night became a shared experience rather than an obstacle. It was during these hours, when the land grew still, that memory formed its earliest rhythms. Not through record, but through repetition. Season after season, night after night. The climate did not explain itself. It did not offer certainty. It simply returned, and people learned to wait. Life during this period was defined by movement. People did not remain in one place long enough for permanence to become necessary. They followed animals. They followed water. They followed seasons. Shelter was temporary by design. What could be carried was valued. What could not be moved was left behind. There was no concept of staying for the sake of staying. Movement was not instability. It was a practiced rhythm. Groups knew when to arrive and when to leave. They recognized the signs of exhaustion in the land and responded by moving on. Nothing was taken beyond what could be replaced. This way of life required attention rather than control. People observed patterns instead of enforcing schedules. They adjusted instead of planning far ahead. Belongings were few. Tools were simple. Knowledge was stored in memory and repetition. In such a world, settlement was not the goal. Returning mattered more than remaining. Places were revisited, not occupied. Familiar locations became anchors within movement. A hill might serve as a gathering point. A valley might offer shelter during certain seasons. But none of these places demanded ownership. They were known, not claimed. This rhythm created a different relationship with space. There was no boundary between center and edge, no fixed distinction between home and elsewhere. Where one stopped was temporary. What endured was the path itself. Movement allowed groups to adapt without forcing the environment to adapt to them. It also created pauses. Moments where people returned, not because they had to stay, but because they chose to gather. In this context, building something permanent would have been unusual, not impossible, but unexpected. And yet, it happened. Among many hills, this one drew return. Not because it was dramatic, and not because it offered immediate survival advantages. It did not shelter large groups from storms. It did not sit beside a permanent river. It was not the most fertile place in the region, and yet, people came back. The hill rose gently above the surrounding land, offering wide visibility without isolation. From its slopes, the horizon could be read. Weather approaching from a distance was visible. Movement across the plains could be observed. This openness mattered. The hill did not enclose. It allowed awareness. Paths converged naturally toward it. Animal routes passed nearby. Seasonal movement made it a point of recognition rather than destination. What distinguished this hill was not what it contained, but how it related to everything around it. It stood at a meeting point, not a border, not a center of control, a place where different movements overlapped without colliding. There was also consistency. Unlike valleys that flooded or plains that changed with vegetation, the hill remained stable. It looked the same from one season to the next. In a world shaped by movement, such reliability was rare. Returning to a familiar form did not require explanation. Memory handled it. Over time, familiarity deepened, not through ownership, but through repetition. Each return reinforced recognition. Each departure confirmed that the place would remain. This reliability allowed something unusual. It made gathering predictable without making it permanent. The hill did not ask people to stay. It did not demand settlement. It simply allowed return without resistance. In a landscape defined by motion, this quiet consistency set the hill apart. And that difference, subtle but dependable, was enough. As daylight softened, activity slowed without instruction. There were no signals to announce the end of the day. No sound marked a transition. The change was felt rather than declared. Shadows lengthened across the hill. Details at a distance dissolved. The land became quieter by degrees. People adjusted naturally. Movement narrowed. Tasks were completed or set aside. Attention shifted from what could be seen to what could be sensed. The night was not entered abruptly. It was approached. Fires were lit with care, not many, not large. A small flame was enough to hold a circle of warmth and light without breaking the surrounding darkness. Faces remained partially unseen. Voices lowered. Conversation shortened. Silence did not feel empty. It felt shared. The hill changed character at night. Its openness became depth. Its visibility gave way to presence. Without distant horizons to occupy the eye, awareness turned inward. Listening replaced looking. Wind through grass. The crackle of fire. Footsteps moving away, then returning. Time loosened its structure. There was no reason to divide it, no urgency to fill it. Waiting became an activity in itself. Not waiting for something to happen, but waiting as a state of being. Night offered a pause that daylight did not allow. In this pause, gathering took on a different quality. People were together without purpose needing explanation. The hill did not instruct them. It did not demand action. It simply held them through the longest hours. As the fire settled into embers and voices faded, the land reclaimed its quiet. Above, the sky remained unchanged. Below, the hill stayed. And in the space between, people rested, not because the day had ended, but because the night had arrived. Living together did not require staying in one place. For communities that had not yet adopted agriculture, togetherness was not anchored to walls, fields, or permanent structures. It was carried through familiarity. Groups formed and dissolved without losing continuity. People separated without becoming strangers. Recognition did not depend on proximity. Social bonds were maintained through repeated encounter, not constant presence. A group might gather during one season, disperse as conditions changed, and return months later without the need to renegotiate belonging. This form of community relied on memory rather than location. Names were remembered, faces were recognized, shared experience replaced written record. Living together meant coordinating movement, not defending territory. There was no need to draw boundaries when return was expected. This created a different kind of social stability. Instead of permanence, there was predictability. Instead of ownership, there was access. A place could host gathering without becoming a home, and a group could function without enclosing itself. In such a system, conflict over space was minimized. No one was required to stay long enough for exhaustion to set in. Resources were shared briefly, then left to recover. This rhythm required trust. Trust that people would return. Trust that absence did not equal abandonment. Trust that separation was part of continuity. Living together was therefore not fragile. It was flexible. It adapted to climate, to animal movement, to seasonal change. Rather than forcing the world to accommodate human presence adjusted itself to the world. This allowed communities to exist without pressure to accumulate. Belongings remained few. Structures remained light. What endured was not the place itself, but the relationship between those who returned to it. Living together, without staying, was not a lack of organization. It was a form of order that did not need to be fixed to remain intact. Gathering did not require instruction. There were no signals sent ahead, no authorities deciding when people should arrive. Movement followed recognition rather than rule. Seasonal change provided enough structure. As animals migrated, people observed and adjusted. As certain plants appeared and faded, paths were remembered. The same locations became familiar not because they were claimed, but because they returned at the same time each year. This created a shared rhythm. People did not gather because they were ordered to. They gathered because the conditions aligned. Weather softened. Resources became available. Movement slowed in predictable ways. Over time, these moments of alignment became expected, not scheduled, but anticipated. Seasonal gathering relied on attention rather than control. It required patience. People learned to wait without forcing arrival. If conditions were not right, Gathering could be delayed or shortened. Nothing collapsed as a result. There was no obligation to maintain a fixed population in a single location. This flexibility prevented strain. Groups expanded temporarily and contracted naturally. Knowledge was shared during these moments. Skills were observed. Stories were repeated. No single gathering carried the burden of permanence. What mattered was repetition over time, not duration. Returning mattered more than remaining. This rhythm created continuity without confinement. People knew where to go because they had been there before. They recognized landmarks without marking them. Memory replaced instruction. Season after season, the same movements unfolded, not identically, but familiarly. In this way, time organized community without being written down. Gathering became a response rather than a command, and because it was not enforced, it remained stable. The tools used during this period were not improvised. They were shaped with intention, through repetition rather than haste. Stone was not treated as a disposable material. It was studied, tested, understood. Different stones behaved differently under pressure. Some fractured cleanly, others resisted, demanding patience. Toolmaking therefore required attention. Hands learned pressure by feel. Angles were adjusted through experience, not instruction. This was not work designed for speed. It was work designed for consistency. Tools needed to last. They needed to function across changing conditions. They needed to be reliable when replacement was not immediate. This required planning. Not planning for accumulation, but planning for continuity. Edges were refined carefully. Surfaces were smoothed deliberately. Mistakes were corrected slowly. The result was not excess, but adequacy. A tool was considered complete when it fulfilled its purpose without waste. There was no incentive to produce more than was needed. There was no pressure to optimize output. Skill was measured through control, not volume. This approach shaped behavior. Work slowed naturally. Repetition became familiar rather than exhausting. Attention stayed present. Toolmaking also encouraged teaching. Skills were visible. Techniques were observed over time. Knowledge passed through demonstration rather than explanation. Nothing was hidden. In this context, technology did not separate people from their environment. It connected them more closely to it. The materials used came from the land itself. Understanding stone meant understanding place. Tools therefore carried local knowledge. They reflected not innovation for its own sake, but adaptation. This form of craftsmanship did not seek progress. It sought balance. Precision mattered because replacement was uncertain. Speed did not. As communities grew more familiar with one another, certain tasks began to settle into patterns. Not through instruction and not through hierarchy. There were no leaders assigning roles, no titles marking authority. Instead, repetition created distinction. Some individuals became more practiced at shaping stone. Others developed stronger awareness of animal movement. Some carried knowledge of roots, of weather changes, of seasonal timing. These differences were not formalized, they were recognized. Task separation emerged quietly, without fixed boundaries. One person might shape tools during one gathering and carry them during another. Flexibility remained. What changed was not obligation, but expectation. People began to anticipate who would handle certain tasks more efficiently. Not because they were commanded to, but because experience had shown reliability. This form of organization did not limit movement. It supported it. Work flowed naturally toward those most familiar with it. There was no incentive to control outcomes. No need to enforce roles. Contribution was visible. Participation remained voluntary. Because gatherings were temporary, no role became permanent. This prevented specialization from becoming restriction. Knowledge stayed shared. Observation remained open. Younger members learned by watching, not by being instructed. Skill was absorbed gradually, through presence rather than pressure. Task separation, therefore, did not create hierarchy. It created rhythm. Each person adjusted their effort to what the moment required. This adaptability mattered. It allowed communities to respond to change without reorganizing structure. Nothing had to be rebuilt when conditions shifted. Roles expanded and contracted as needed. In this way, organization existed without enclosure. Structure formed without rigidity. Tasks separated, but people remained equal. And cooperation continued without command. Time, during this period, was not written down. It was not divided into units. It was not stored in marks or symbols. And yet, it was clearly understood. People did not ask what day it was. They asked what was happening. Time was recognized through change rather than count. The return of certain animals, the ripening of plants, the lengthening of shadows in late afternoon. Nightfall arrived not as a deadline, but as a signal. Morning did not begin at a fixed hour. It began when light allowed movement. In this way, time remained embedded in the environment. Memory replaced record. People remembered when to return because they had returned before. Seasonal patterns repeated often enough to become familiar. No one needed to write them down to know them. This form of time required attention. One had to notice subtle shifts, temperature, wind direction, the quality of light. Time was sensed rather than measured. Because it was not fixed, it remained flexible. If conditions changed, timing adjusted. Nothing was considered late. Nothing was early. Events occurred when they were ready. This approach removed pressure. There was no race against time, because time did not stand apart from life. It moved with it. This also affected how people planned. Planning was short-term and adaptive. Long-term certainty was neither possible nor expected. Instead of predicting far ahead, people responded as patterns unfolded. This created resilience. When time is not rigid, disruption does not feel like failure. It feels like variation. Without records, time could not be owned or controlled. It belonged to no one. It passed through experience and left its mark only in memory. And memory, unlike record, could adjust without breaking. Across the site, one form appears again and again. Tall, upright, deliberate. The stones share a consistent shape, often described as T-shaped, though the description only captures part of their presence. They rise vertically from the ground, their horizontal tops extending outward, creating a form that is neither purely architectural nor fully representational. This shape is repeated across multiple enclosures. The dimensions change. Some stones are taller, some are broader, some are heavier, but the proportions remain familiar. This repetition suggests intention, not variation for decoration, but consistency for recognition. The stones were not placed casually. They required planning, coordination, and effort. Each one was shaped from limestone, cut with stone tools, and transported into position. The labor involved was significant. The form itself does not announce its purpose. It does not point toward utility. It does not resemble tools, shelters, or barriers. Instead, it stands. The upright posture gives the stones a presence that feels active, even in stillness. They do not lean, they do not rest, they remain alert. Spacing between the stones is also consistent. They face inward, often forming circular or oval arrangements. This orientation creates a sense of enclosure without walls. The stones define space without blocking movement. From a distance, the shapes read as markers. Up close, they feel monumental. Despite their size, they are not chaotic. Edges are smoothed, surfaces are controlled. The repetition of form reduces visual noise. Attention settles rather than scatters. Nothing in the shape demands interpretation. There are no inscriptions, no directional indicators, no signs instructing where to stand or what to do. The stones do not guide behavior. They establish presence. Their verticality contrasts with the horizontal landscape. Against the open plains and gentle slopes, they interrupt the line of sight. This interruption is subtle but deliberate. The stones do not dominate the land, they punctuate it. Each enclosure repeats this visual language, a limited number of forms used again and again. The decision to repeat rather than diversify suggests restraint, not a lack of imagination, but a preference for clarity. The stones do not compete with one another, they coexist. This creates rhythm. The eye moves slowly from one form to the next, recognizing similarity before difference. The shape becomes familiar without becoming ordinary. Over time, this familiarity would have deepened. Those who return to the site would recognize the form before noticing detail. The shape itself became a reference point. It did not explain itself. It did not evolve visibly. It stayed. In a world defined by movement, such consistency mattered. The shape returned because it was meant to be returned to. The stones suggest presence without offering identity. They stand upright, their proportions balanced, their surfaces carefully worked. And yet, they do not show faces. There are no eyes, no mouths, no expressions to read. What appears instead are subtle details that hint without defining. On some stones, shallow reliefs resemble arms. They run along the sides, bending gently toward the front. Hands seem to meet near the lower portion of the stone, resting rather than grasping. These elements are not emphasized. They do not demand attention. They remain understated, as if intentionally restrained. The overall form feels human-like, but never fully human. It does not imitate a body. It does not depict a figure in action. There is no movement frozen in stone, no narrative moment captured. The absence of a face is striking. In later cultures, faces often carried meaning. They identified individuals. They communicated emotion, rank, or divinity. Here, that entire layer is missing. What remains is posture. The stones stand as if attentive, not expressive, but present. This creates ambiguity. The form neither confirms nor denies representation. It allows association without instruction. From one angle, the stones feel abstract. From another, they feel watchful. The ambiguity is consistent across the site. There are no exceptions that break this restraint. No stone introduces a face where others remain blank. This consistency matters. It suggests that a mission was not accidental. The decision not to carve faces was repeated as deliberately as the overall form itself. This restraint shifts attention. Instead of focusing on identity, the observer becomes aware of space. The stones relate to one another rather than to the viewer. They face inward. They stand in relation, not display. The lack of facial features prevents personalization. No individual is singled out. No character emerges. This keeps interpretation open without inviting projection. The stones do not reflect back the observer's expectations. They remain neutral. In this neutrality, they resist ownership of meaning. They do not belong to a single story. They do not represent a specific being that can be named or classified. Instead, they occupy a shared form, a form that repeats without variation in identity. This repetition creates continuity without hierarchy. No stone appears more expressive than another. No figure asserts dominance through detail. Everything remains balanced. The form suggests presence without voice. It does not speak. It does not explain. It simply remains. In a landscape where movement defined life, this quiet, faceless presence created a contrast, something stable, something consistent, not a portrait, not a symbol to be decoded, just a form that refused to specify what it was meant to be. And in doing so, it left space for silence. Animals appear across the stones, but they do not act. They are carved in profile, their bodies elongated, their forms precise. Snakes curve along surfaces. Foxes stand alert. Boars, birds, insects, and other creatures are rendered with careful attention to outline. Yet nothing happens. There is no chase, no confrontation, no sequence of events linking one figure to another. Each animal exists alone, isolated from narrative. They are not arranged into scenes. They do not interact. They do not suggest motion beyond their own shape. The carvings are consistent in style. They emphasize form rather than detail. Muscle is implied, not exaggerated. Eyes are present, but not expressive. Mouths are closed. The animals do not look at one another. They do not look outward. They remain contained within their own presence. The selection of animals is notable. Many are creatures familiar to the region. Some are dangerous, some are ordinary. But no hierarchy is established. Predators do not dominate prey. Large animals do not overwhelm smaller ones. Scale remains balanced. The carvings do not elevate one animal above another. Repetition occurs. Certain animals appear again and again across different stones and enclosures. The repetition does not explain itself. It does not build toward meaning. It establishes familiarity without clarification. The animals are not labeled. They are not grouped by type or function. They simply appear. There is no indication that they represent stories, myths, or events. They do not commemorate hunts. They do not illustrate victories. There is no triumph in their posture. They are alert, but not aggressive. Still, but not lifeless. The absence of narrative is consistent. No stone breaks this pattern by introducing interaction or sequence. This restraint matters. It suggests that depiction was not meant to instruct or entertain. The animals do not serve as symbols in an obvious way. They are not marked as warnings. They do not indicate boundaries. They occupy the surface of the stone without directing interpretation. Attention is drawn to their presence, not their meaning. This presence is quiet. The carvings do not compete for focus. They coexist. Placed across the stones, they form a field of repeated forms rather than a storyline. The viewer is not guided from one figure to the next. The eye moves slowly, not urgently. The animals remain available without insisting on understanding. In later periods, animals often carried explicit symbolism. They stood for forces, deities, or moral lessons. Here, that layer is absent. What remains is depiction without explanation. The animals are not silent because they lack voice. They are silent because they do not speak in sequence. They do not narrate. They endure. Their presence does not demand response. It allows observation without conclusion. In this way, the stones maintain their quiet. Even as they show life, they refuse story. Across the stones, certain forms return, not once, not twice, but repeatedly. They appear on different pillars, in different enclosures, sometimes separated by distance, sometimes facing one another. The repetition is deliberate. These symbols are not placed randomly. They are positioned with care, aligned to surfaces, integrated into the stone rather than added afterward. Some shapes are simple, lines, curves, abstract markings that resist clear identification. Others resemble objects or forms, but never fully define themselves. A shape may suggest a tool. Another may resemble a body part. Another appears entirely geometric. None are labeled. None are isolated for emphasis. They repeat without hierarchy. No symbol is framed as more important than another. No central motif dominates the visual field. This creates an evenness. The eye is not drawn toward a single focal point. Instead, it moves slowly across surfaces, recognizing similarity before seeking difference. The repetition creates rhythm rather than message. Some symbols appear unchanged across stones. Others vary slightly. A curve becomes sharper. A line shortens or extends. Spacing shifts. These variations are subtle. They suggest adjustment rather than invention. The forms remain within a shared visual language. There is no progression. The symbols do not evolve from simple to complex. They do not accumulate detail over time. Each instance stands complete. This absence of development is notable. In systems designed to communicate, repetition often builds meaning. Here, repetition builds familiarity. It allows recognition without explanation. The symbols do not instruct the viewer how to read them. They do not point to one another. They do not form sequences. There is no beginning or end. They exist in parallel. Placed across multiple stones, the symbols become part of the surface rather than carriers of content. They do not interrupt the form of the pillar. They follow it. Carvings respect the vertical orientation of the stone. They adapt to its shape. This integration suggests intention. The symbols were not meant to stand apart. They were meant to belong. And yet they remain closed. They do not translate into known systems. They do not correspond clearly to later iconography. Attempts to decode them often rely on comparison, analogy, or projection. But the stones themselves offer no confirmation. They repeat without explanation and without apology. This restraint preserves ambiguity. The symbols do not insist on meaning. They do not invite conclusion. They remain available without becoming transparent. For those who return to the site, the repetition may have served recognition rather than instruction. Seeing the same forms again could have reinforced familiarity. Not understanding, but remembering. Memory does not require clarity. It requires consistency. These symbols provide that. They hold position. They repeat form. They resist interpretation. In doing so, they shift focus away from decoding and toward presence. The stones do not ask to be read. They allow themselves to be seen. And what repeats across them is not a message, but a pattern that remains without explanation. Taken together, the stones form something that resembles a language. There is repetition. There is structure. There is restraint. And yet, nothing is said. There are no sentences, no sequences that lead from one idea to another, no symbols that resolve into instruction. This absence is consistent. The stones do not provide keys. They do not direct attention toward a correct reading. They do not explain their own arrangement. They stand in relation to one another, but not in dialogue. Each pillar maintains its presence without responding to the others. This creates a system that looks communicative without functioning as communication. In later cultures, language sought to clarify. It named, it recorded, it preserved intention. Here, none of that occurs. There is no attempt to fix meaning in place. The stones do not claim authority. They do not persuade. They do not warn or instruct. They simply exist in a shared form. This refusal to speak is not emptiness. It is a choice. The consistency of silence across the site suggests that explanation was not required. Meaning did not need to be transmitted. Whatever understanding existed was not dependent on words, symbols, or decoding. It may have resided elsewhere, in presence, in repetition, in return. The stones did not teach. They did not guide behavior. They did not separate those who understood from those who did not. Everyone encountered the same forms. Everyone stood within the same space. Nothing was hidden behind knowledge. This equality matters. A language that refuses to speak cannot be controlled. It cannot be misinterpreted. It cannot be used to command. It does not grant power to those who claim understanding. Instead, it remains open without being accessible. This creates calm. Without messages to extract, the observer is released from the need to solve. Attention shifts away from meaning and toward experience. The stones become part of the landscape rather than an object of inquiry. They blend into time instead of interrupting it. This may be why the site endures without resolution, not because its message is lost, but because it was never meant to be delivered. The language present here does not translate. It does not need to. It holds its form without explanation, and in doing so, it allows silence to remain intact. The stones do not speak because they were not built to convince. They were built to remain. The gathering did not happen by chance. It followed no emergency, no sudden need, no moment of crisis. People arrived because it was time, not a date, not a number, but a moment recognized through repetition. Ritual begins there, not as belief, but as rhythm. In this world, ritual was not separated from daily life. It did not interrupt routine. It was the routine. People returned to the same place because they had returned before. Not to stay, not to claim, only to gather. The act of coming together did not require explanation. No one needed to be told why they were there. The movement itself carried meaning. Ritual did not explain purpose. It created familiarity. At Göbekli Tepe, nothing suggests permanent residence. There are no hearths meant to last, no walls enclosing private space, no traces of long-term settlement. And yet, the site was returned to again and again. This repetition defines ritual more clearly than any symbol or carving. Ritual is not marked by permanence. It is marked by return. People came knowing they would leave. They gathered without planning to remain. This distinction matters. It shows a form of organization that does not rely on ownership. The place was not claimed. It was approached. Ritual creates order without possession. It allows people to act together without binding them to the land. In later societies, ritual often becomes formal. It gains hierarchy. It gains instruction. It gains authority. Here, ritual remains simple. It does not elevate one person above another. It does not separate leaders from participants. Everyone who arrived stood under the same sky. Everyone experienced the same space. The rhythm was shared. The repetition of gathering created stability without settlement. This stability did not depend on structures. It depended on memory. Memory did not require writing. It required return. Ritual strengthened memory by repeating movement. Walking the same paths, standing in the same enclosures, facing the same stones. Each return reinforced familiarity. Nothing new was demanded. The ritual did not evolve rapidly. It did not seek novelty. It relied on sameness. This sameness is calming. The body recognizes it before the mind tries to understand. Ritual allowed people to slow down without stopping life entirely. They gathered. They stayed briefly. They left. This cycle prevented fixation. No one remained long enough to reshape the place into a home, and the place did not reshape them into residence. Ritual maintained distance between people and permanence. It kept the relationship balanced. The site was important, but not consuming. It mattered, but did not demand possession. This balance created calm. There was no urgency to build shelter, no pressure to remain productive. The act of gathering itself was sufficient. Ritual did not aim to produce outcomes. It did not seek transformation. It allowed continuity without accumulation. Each gathering stood complete on its own. It did not build towards something else. This absence of progression creates a different sense of time. Time does not move forward here. It circles. Ritual accepts this. It does not rush. It does not advance. It returns. And in returning, it holds space open without filling it. This is why ritual at Göbekli Tepe feels quiet. It does not ask questions. It does not promise answers. It provides a moment that begins and ends without urgency. A gathering that exists only for the time it is held. Then releases. The work was heavy. Stone does not move easily. It resists hands. It resists intention. And yet, the stones were moved, not by individuals, but by many. There is no evidence of permanent crews, no indication of assigned roles that lasted beyond the moment. People came together, worked together, and then dispersed. The labor was shared, but nothing suggests ownership followed. No names were carved. No marks claimed contribution. The stones do not record who lifted them. They do not preserve effort. They only remain. This absence matters. In many later societies, labor creates entitlement. Work becomes proof of possession. Effort demands reward. Here, that logic does not appear. The stones were shaped and raised without becoming property. They did not belong to those who carved them. They did not mark territory. The labor ended without leaving claims behind. This changes the nature of work. Effort becomes temporary, like the gathering itself. People did not work to stay. They worked to complete. Once the task ended, so did their connection to the stone. Nothing tied them to it afterward. The absence of permanence lightened the work. There was no pressure to build something that would be lived in. No need to optimize for comfort. The goal was not utility. The labor served the gathering, not daily life. This allowed cooperation without competition. No one gained advantage by working more. No one stood above others because of strength or skill. The stones required coordination, not dominance. Movement had to be synchronized. Hands had to respond to one another. This created unity without hierarchy. The work did not elevate leaders. It did not separate workers from observers. Everyone present participated according to ability, not rank. This balance reduced tension. The work progressed steadily, without urgency. There was no deadline. No season demanded completion. The stones were not needed for survival. They were not shelter. They were not tools. They were part of the gathering. When work is not tied to survival, it changes pace. Movements slow. Attention widens. People become aware of one another. The shared effort creates connection without obligation. Once the stones were placed, the labor ended. There was no maintenance cycle, no expectation of constant repair. The stones were allowed to stand on their own. This release is important. It shows that work did not bind people to the site. After the gathering, people left. They returned to movement, to hunting, to foraging, to seasonal travel. The stones remained behind without caretakers. This separation preserved balance. The place did not become dependent on people, and people did not become dependent on the place. Shared labor without ownership prevented attachment. It allowed creation without control. The stones existed without belonging, and those who worked on them carried no burden when they walked away. This made return possible. Because nothing was claimed, nothing had to be defended. Because nothing was owned, nothing could be lost. The work was complete when it ended. The stones did not demand more. They stood quietly as the people moved on. Night arrives gradually. There is no signal. No moment when day clearly ends. Light softens. Shadows lengthen. And then fire appears. Not suddenly, not brightly. A small flame begins. It grows only as much as it needs to. The fire does not compete with the dark. It rests within it. Around the fire, people gather. Not close enough to crowd, not far enough to separate. The space is shared quietly. Fire becomes the center without commanding attention. It offers warmth, but not comfort. It offers light, but not clarity. Faces remain partially hidden, voices lower. The night reshapes interaction. Movement slows. Gestures become smaller. The fire does not encourage conversation. It allows presence. Those seated nearby do not need to speak. The flame flickers without pattern. It repeats without rhythm. This repetition draws attention inward. Eyes follow movement without tracking purpose. The fire does not teach. It does not instruct. It exists. The stones nearby catch fragments of light. Edges soften. Carvings appear and disappear as shadows shift. Nothing is fully revealed. This partial visibility matters. It prevents fixation. The mind does not settle on detail. It drifts. The night air carries sound differently. Crackling wood, occasional movement, breathing. These sounds do not interrupt silence. They define it. The fire holds the group together without binding them. It creates a shared field without demanding interaction. Time changes near fire. There is no measurement, no sense of duration. Moments expand. The fire burns without marking progress. It does not signal beginning or end. People arrive and leave its edge without ceremony. No one is assigned a place. The fire does not face anyone. It does not distinguish roles. It accepts all positions equally. This equality calms the space. No one dominates attention. No voice rises above others. The fire absorbs focus without redirecting it. As the night deepens, the fire lowers. Not extinguished, but allowed to fade. No urgency to maintain it. No need to keep it alive beyond its use. This acceptance of fading is significant. The fire is not preserved. It is not guarded. It ends naturally. Ash settles. Heat recedes. The night continues. People do not rush to replace it. They allow darkness to return fully. This transition is smooth. There is no contrast. Fire and dark share space without conflict. The stones remain. The fire does not claim them. It touches them briefly and releases. This temporary relationship mirrors the gathering itself. Fire, like people, arrives, serves, and leaves. Nothing is left behind except memory. And memory does not need light to persist. The night holds what remains. Quietly. Nothing here moves forward. There is no sense of advancement, no indication of improvement, no trace of accumulation. The same actions return. People arrive, they gather, they work, they sit, they leave, and then they return again. This repetition does not build towards something else. There is no larger structure waiting to be completed, no future stage implied by the present one. Each gathering stands complete without needing the next. This absence of progression is intentional. In many societies, repetition is a step toward growth, a rehearsal for expansion, a preparation for permanence. Here, repetition serves a different role. It stabilizes. The same movements performed again and again create familiarity without direction. There is no urgency to change them. No attempt to refine or optimize. The actions remain sufficient as they are. This creates a rhythm that does not accelerate. Time does not compress. It spreads. Moments do not lead to outcomes. They simply occur. This rhythm settles the body. Without goals to reach, attention softens. Without progress to track, the mind releases tension. Repetition becomes grounding. The same stones, the same enclosures, the same paths walked. Returning does not feel like repetition in the modern sense. It does not feel redundant. It feels steady. Each return confirms continuity, not improvement, not change, just presence. The lack of progress prevents hierarchy. No one advances further than another. No group claims superiority through development. Everyone participates within the same cycle. This equality is maintained through repetition. Because nothing changes significantly, no one gains advantage. The cycle remains open. Repetition also removes expectation. When nothing new is promised, nothing is anticipated. The gathering does not need to surprise. It does not need to impress. It does not need to grow. This absence of expectation reduces strain. The body recognizes the pattern and relaxes into it. Movement becomes familiar. Awareness shifts from outcome to sensation. Feet on ground, hands on stone, heat from fire. The same experiences repeat without variation. This consistency is calming. The cycle does not mark time, it dissolves it. Without progress, there is no timeline to follow, no beginning that leads to an end. The gathering exists outside linear order. It does not belong to past or future. It occurs, and then it releases. When people leave, nothing indicates completion. No marker signals closure. The absence of conclusion makes return possible. Because nothing finishes, nothing ends. This continuity allows memory to remain unforced. No one needs to remember details. The body remembers the rhythm. Return does not require recall. It requires movement. Walking back to the same place. Standing again within the same space. Repetition maintains connection without demanding attention. It does not need explanation. It does not justify itself. It simply happens. This is repetition without progress, a cycle without destination, a pattern that does not resolve. In this space, the idea of improvement does not exist. Only return, and return is enough. Leaving was expected. No one arrived believing they would remain. The gathering carried its own ending from the moment it began. People knew the rhythm. They had followed it before. When the time came, there was no announcement. No signal marked departure. The fire lowered, movement slowed, and gradually, the space emptied. Leaving did not feel like loss. Nothing was taken away. Nothing needed to be secured. The stones remained exactly as they were. No effort was made to protect them from absence. This acceptance mattered. It meant the place did not depend on presence. It existed without observers. People walked away without looking back repeatedly. There was no hesitation. The gathering did not demand attachment. It did not ask to be remembered immediately. Memory was allowed to settle later. As people returned to movement, to travel, to daily survival, the site stayed behind. Quiet, unchanged. It did not follow them. This separation created balance. The place belonged to itself. People belonged to motion. Neither claimed the other. And because nothing was owned, nothing needed to be defended. Leaving did not create distance. It preserved return. The path back remained open because it was never closed. No structures blocked entry. No signs restricted access. The site did not transform into territory. It remained a place to approach, not occupy. This made return natural. When people came back, they did not arrive as visitors. They returned as participants. Nothing had shifted. The stones stood in the same positions. The enclosures held the same shapes. Familiarity resumed instantly. No orientation was required. The place remembered itself. This constancy reduced effort. Return did not require planning. It did not demand preparation. It was part of movement, not an interruption of it. Leaving and returning formed a single motion. One did not exist without the other. The gathering was incomplete without departure, and departure only made sense because return remained possible. This cycle prevented fixation. People did not linger long enough to reshape the place. They did not stay long enough to impose personal meaning. The site retained neutrality. It did not accumulate stories. It did not preserve individual moments. Each gathering passed through without leaving residue. This allowed the place to remain open. No single moment defined it. No group claimed it as theirs. Time moved through the site without settling. This quality preserved calm. The place did not carry expectation. It did not promise fulfillment. It did not require completion. It simply waited. Waiting here does not imply anticipation. It implies readiness. The site remained available without calling. People returned when it was time, not because they were summoned, not because something was missing, but because return itself was part of the rhythm. Leaving allowed rest. Returning restored familiarity. Neither action carried urgency. Neither demanded explanation. This balance kept the gathering light. It did not weigh on memory. It did not burden the future. The cycle continued because it was not forced. And so, leaving did not end the gathering. It completed it. And returning did not begin something new. It resumed what had never fully stopped. At some point, the stones were covered. Not abandoned, not broken, not erased, covered. The action itself is quiet. There is no sign of haste, no trace of destruction, no indication of urgency. The enclosures were not left to collapse. They were not dismantled. They were deliberately filled, stone by stone, layer by layer. This matters. Because covering requires time. It requires attention. It requires choice. The stones were already standing. They had already served their purpose. And yet, someone decided they should no longer remain visible. There is no evidence that this decision followed crisis. No sign of environmental catastrophe. No indication of threat. Life did not suddenly change. The decision appears calm. This calmness is important. It tells us that the act of covering was not reactive. It was not forced. It was chosen. The materials used to fill the enclosures were not random debris. They were placed. This placement suggests care. The stones were not damaged in the process. They were not pushed aside or shattered. They were gently removed from view, as if visibility itself had reached its end. The act of covering does not announce intention. It does not explain itself. It leaves no message behind, but it does reveal attitude. It shows restraint. The builders did not try to preserve the site for eternity. They did not attempt to protect it from time, nor did they seek to destroy it. They allowed it to rest. Covering is different from forgetting. Forgetting implies absence of care. Covering implies attention. One does not cover what does not matter. The effort required to bury the stones exceeded the effort required to abandon them. Walking away would have been easier. Leaving them exposed would have required nothing. But effort was invested. This suggests intention beyond convenience. The stones were not meant to disappear violently. They were meant to withdraw. This withdrawal feels deliberate, as if the place had completed its role. As if remaining visible was no longer necessary. The act of covering did not remove meaning. It suspended it. The stones remained where they were. They were not relocated. They were not repurposed. They were allowed to stay without being seen. This choice creates distance. Not separation, but pause. The builders did not demand remembrance. They did not carve final marks. They did not leave warnings or instructions. They did not explain why. They simply covered. This silence is consistent with everything else at the site. No inscriptions, no proclamations, no declarations of purpose. The stones had never spoken. Now they were allowed to fall quiet completely. Covering also changes time. What is visible participates in daily rhythm. What is buried does not. By removing the stones from sight, they were removed from immediacy. They no longer belonged to the present. They were allowed to pass into duration. This reflects a different relationship with time. Not preservation for the future, not destruction for closure. Something else. Perhaps the builders did not think in terms of future observers. Perhaps they did not imagine discovery. The act of covering does not suggest a desire to hide from others. There is no secrecy here, only withdrawal. The stones were not hidden behind barriers. They were not concealed in inaccessible places. They were buried where they stood, still part of the landscape, still connected to the hill, but no longer participating. This decision does not express fear. It expresses completion. Whatever had drawn people here no longer required visible markers. The gathering could end, the ritual could close, and the place could remain without calling anyone back. Covering the stones did not erase memory. Memory did not depend on visibility. Those who had gathered there already carried familiarity. The stones did not need to remain exposed to be remembered. In fact, perhaps remembering was not the point. Perhaps release was. Covering can be understood as a form of letting go, not rejection, not loss, but acceptance that a cycle has ended. The builders did not resist change. They did not cling to the site. They allowed it to withdraw with dignity. This choice resists modern expectations. We expect continuity, preservation, legacy. We expect structures to endure visibly. Here, endurance takes a different form. The stones endure by stepping out of sight. They remain without asserting presence. This quiet endurance feels intentional. It suggests confidence. Confidence that nothing needed to be proven. Confidence that meaning did not require display. The act of covering does not feel like an ending. It feels like a pause without urgency to resume. The site does not close itself dramatically. It does not mark the end of an era. It simply stops asking for attention. This withdrawal is powerful. It denies spectacle. It denies explanation. It leaves space without filling it. And in doing so, it preserves calm. The stones do not disappear. They wait, not for rediscovery, not for interpretation. They wait because waiting is what remains when explanation is no longer needed. Nothing about the site suggests haste. There are no broken pillars, no fractured carvings, no signs of sudden collapse. The stones were not pushed over. They were not damaged. They were not left in disorder. Everything indicates time. Time taken. Time allowed. The act of covering did not happen under pressure. There is no evidence of panic, no trace of flight, no indication that people were responding to threat. If danger had approached, the stones would have been abandoned, not carefully buried. Urgency leaves marks. It creates mistakes. It creates unevenness. It leaves behind fragments of intent. None of that appears here. The fill material is consistent. The enclosures were treated with care. This suggests planning, and planning suggests calm. The builders did not act because they had to. They acted because they chose to. This distinction is essential. In moments of crisis, people simplify. They remove what is unnecessary. They leave behind what slows them. Here, effort increased. The act of covering required labor. It required coordination. It required time that could have been spent elsewhere. This labor did not contribute to survival. It did not improve shelter. It did not secure food. It served no immediate need. This absence of necessity reveals intention. The builders were not escaping something. They were concluding something. The stones were not treated as obstacles. They were treated as completed forms. Nothing suggests that they were considered dangerous or unwanted. They were not neutralized. They were respected. The process does not resemble destruction. Destruction seeks removal. It breaks. It fragments. It leaves sharp edges. Here, edges remain smooth. Surfaces remain intact. The stones retain their form. They were not undone. They were withdrawn. This calm withdrawal challenges modern expectations. We often assume that significant structures disappear because of conflict, collapse, or catastrophe. But here, disappearance is gentle. It does not announce itself. It does not leave scars. The absence of urgency also changes interpretation. Without threat, there is no reason to imagine fear. Without fear, there is no need for secrecy. The stones were not hidden. They were placed beneath the surface of the same hill that had held them before, still part of the landscape, still connected, just no longer visible. This matters, because hiding implies concealment. Covering implies closure. The builders did not try to erase traces. They allowed the site to remain accessible to time. They did not protect it from erosion. They did not preserve it for future use. They simply allowed it to rest. This lack of urgency also suggests confidence. Confidence that nothing was unfinished. Confidence that the stones had fulfilled their role. Confidence that leaving them visible was no longer required. Urgency demands resolution. Calm allows acceptance. Here, acceptance is visible in every layer of fill. The stones were not rushed into obscurity. They were guided there. The absence of destruction also preserves meaning. Nothing was destroyed because nothing needed to be denied. The builders did not reject the site. They did not abandon it in frustration. They did not attempt to erase memory. They allowed memory to settle naturally. This approach reflects a different relationship with loss. Loss here is not dramatic. It is quiet. The stones are not mourned. They are not celebrated. They are released. The process feels ceremonial without ritualizing. It carries weight without creating spectacle. No urgency also means no interruption. Life did not fracture around this decision. People did not reorganize suddenly. There is no sign of social collapse. The site did not fall because society fell. The site was covered while life continued. This continuity matters. It shows that the decision was integrated into normal rhythm, not imposed from outside. The builders did not fight time. They moved with it. They did not try to preserve the stones forever, nor did they try to destroy them quickly. They allowed time to absorb them. This balance is rare. It resists extremes. It does not seek permanence. It does not seek erasure. It chooses rest. The absence of urgency is not emptiness. It is fullness without motion. The stones do not disappear suddenly. They fade from presence. And fading is different from loss. Loss demands explanation. Fading does not. It allows things to be completed without announcement. The stones did not fall. They were allowed to lie down. And in that act, nothing was broken. Nothing was denied. Nothing was rushed. Only time was given permission to continue. The act of covering raises a quiet question. Was it meant to protect or to close? The stones themselves do not answer. They offer no indication of intention. No marker suggests future return. No sign points toward finality. Both possibilities remain present, and neither is confirmed. Protection implies care. It suggests that something valuable was placed beyond immediate reach. Covering, in this sense, becomes an act of preservation. The stones are shielded from weather, from erosion, from interference. They remain intact because they are hidden. This interpretation assumes continuity, that the builders imagined a future in which the stones might matter again, not necessarily to themselves, but to time. Closure, however, suggests completion. It implies that the stones had fulfilled their role, that they were no longer needed to remain visible. In this view, covering becomes an ending, not destruction, but conclusion. The stones are not preserved for return, they are allowed to withdraw. Both interpretations fit the evidence, and neither requires urgency. Protection does not demand haste. Closure does not demand destruction. The calm nature of the covering supports both readings equally. If protection was the intent, it was quiet protection. There were no barriers, no warning signs, no effort to conceal location. The stones were covered but not removed. They remained part of the hill, still accessible but not visible. This suggests that protection was not about secrecy. It was about distance. Distance from daily life. Distance from interaction. If closure was the intent, it was gentle closure. There were no final gestures, no markings to signal the end. The stones were not dismantled. They were not erased. They were simply removed from use. This suggests that closure did not require declaration. It did not need to be understood. It only needed to happen. Modern frameworks struggle here. We tend to separate preservation and ending into distinct categories. We expect decisions to align clearly with one or the other. But this site resists such clarity. The act of covering may have held both meanings. It may have protected the stones by closing their role. It may have closed their role by protecting them from change. These possibilities do not cancel each other. They overlap. The builders may not have felt the need to define intention. The act itself may have been sufficient. Covering does not ask to be interpreted. It performs its function without explanation. This ambiguity is consistent with the site as a whole. The stones never explained themselves. Their carvings did not narrate. Their forms did not instruct. Their silence did not invite decoding. Why should their covering be different? Protection and closure are modern distinctions. They require categorization. But the builders may have operated outside this framework. They may not have seen a difference. What mattered may have been balance. Leaving the stones visible may have disrupted rhythm. Covering them may have restored it. This restoration does not require motive. It requires alignment. The act does not look forward or backward. It does not reference past gatherings or anticipate future ones. It exists in its own moment, a decision made because it felt complete. The stones did not need to remain open, nor did they need to be destroyed. They could remain without participating. This middle state is difficult to name. It is neither protection nor closure in the strict sense. It is release. Release from visibility. Release from use. Release from interpretation. The stones were allowed to step out of relationship. They were no longer part of interaction. They did not call people back. They did not invite gathering. They did not ask to be understood. They simply remained. The ambiguity of this act is not a failure of evidence. It is a feature of restraint. The builders did not explain, because explanation was unnecessary. The stones did not need to mean something later. They had already meant something enough. This acceptance of ambiguity is uncomfortable for modern minds. We seek resolution. We seek motive. But here, the act resists closure in explanation, even as it enacts closure in form. Protection or closure may be the wrong question. The stones were not preserved for something. They were not closed against something. They were allowed to be complete. And completeness does not require definition. It allows things to stop asking for attention. The stones were covered not to hide them, not to erase them, but to let them rest. And rest does not need a reason. The act of covering the stones reveals something subtle, not about intention, but about time. Here, time does not rush. It does not press forward. It does not demand continuation. The builders did not act as if the future were waiting, nor did they act as if the past needed preservation. The decision to cover was not directed toward what comes next. It existed fully in its own moment. This suggests a relationship with time that is neither linear nor progressive. Time was not something to be managed. It was something to move within. The stones had stood for generations. They had witnessed return after return. And yet, their covering was not framed as an interruption of continuity. It did not signal loss. It signaled release. Modern societies often preserve because they fear forgetting. They record, they store, they archive. Preservation becomes a defense against disappearance. Here, there is no such defense. The stones were not preserved to remain visible. They were allowed to leave the present. This indicates trust. Trust that meaning does not vanish when visibility ends. Trust that memory does not require maintenance. The builders did not attempt to freeze the site in time. They did not reinforce it. They did not repair it endlessly. They did not update it. They accepted change. Covering the stones was not a way to control time. It was a way to step aside from it. The stones no longer needed to participate in daily cycles. They did not need to mark seasons. They did not need to gather people. They were allowed to exist outside repetition. This withdrawal changes their temporal role. They move from lived time into duration. Duration does not measure. It does not count. It simply holds. The builders did not seem concerned with how long the stones would remain buried. They did not prepare for rediscovery. They did not signal where to find them. They did not leave clues. This suggests that future recognition was not a priority. Time was not imagined as a line extending forward. It was experienced as a field. One could enter it, leave it, return to it, or step out of it completely. The stones stepping out of visibility mirrors the gathering stepping out of permanence. Nothing here demands continuity. Nothing insists on endurance. The site does not ask to be remembered actively. It allows memory to dissolve into familiarity. This approach resists accumulation. Modern time often builds. Each moment adds to the next. Here, moments stand alone. The covering of the stones did not add to the site's story. It reduced it, not by erasing meaning, but by releasing it from sequence. The stones did not become history in the modern sense. They became presence without time. Their burial removed them from urgency. They were no longer part of now. They were not positioned for later. They simply remained. This acceptance of non-participation is rare. It reflects a confidence that nothing needs to persist visibly to matter. The builders did not fear that time would undo their work. They allowed time to take responsibility. This is a different form of agency. Instead of resisting change, they cooperated with it. Instead of marking permanence, they allowed impermanence to settle gently. The stones were not meant to last forever in sight. They were meant to exist fully for as long as they were needed. And when they were no longer needed, they were released. This release does not feel like abandonment. It feels complete. The builders did not measure time by legacy. They did not seek to extend influence. They did not imagine future observers. They acted within the present without projecting themselves forward. This allows rest. Rest from continuity. Rest from purpose. The stones were allowed to stop participating without stopping existing. This is not erasure. It is withdrawal. And withdrawal changes time. What withdraws does not disappear. It simply no longer responds. The stones do not answer questions. They do not explain themselves. They wait without expectation. This waiting is not passive. It is neutral. Time here is not something to conquer. It is something to allow. The act of covering the stones did not fight time. It stepped into it. And in doing so, it demonstrated a relationship with time that does not demand attention, does not fear loss, and does not insist on continuation. Time was not counted. It was accepted. The act of covering the stones raises one final quiet question. Was this an attempt to forget, or a choice to leave something untouched? Forgetting suggests rejection. It implies turning away. But nothing here feels rejected. The stones were not dismantled. They were not pushed aside. They were not erased from the landscape. They were treated carefully. This care does not align with forgetting. Forgetting is effortless. It requires no labor. Covering, however, demands attention. It asks people to stay longer, to work more, to invest effort where none was required. If the intent had been to forget, leaving would have been enough. Walking away would have achieved that, but they did more. They stayed to ensure the stones were held. This suggests a different motivation. Perhaps the goal was not to remove memory, but to free it. Memory does not always require visibility. Sometimes, constant presence interferes with remembering. What remains visible demands engagement. What withdraws allows distance. The stones, once covered, no longer participated in daily awareness. They did not call attention. They did not interrupt movement. They did not ask to be understood. This silence created space. Space for memory to soften. Space for familiarity to fade gently rather than collapse suddenly. Forgetting, in this sense, is not erasure. It is release. Not a refusal to remember, but a refusal to maintain remembrance actively. The builders did not place the stones where they could not be found. They did not scatter them. They left them where they were, still connected to the hill, still part of the place, but untouched. To leave something untouched is not the same as abandoning it. Abandonment implies neglect. Untouched implies respect. The stones were allowed to exist without interference, no repairs, no additions, no re-engagement. They were not altered further. They were permitted to settle into stillness. This stillness does not demand interpretation. It does not require preservation. It does not ask to be passed on. The stones were not prepared for legacy. They were released from expectation. This challenges modern instincts. We assume that important things must be remembered deliberately. We build monuments. We record stories. We mark dates. Here, none of that appears. The builders did not try to secure memory. They trusted it to behave naturally. Memory could fade, or it could persist quietly. Either outcome was acceptable. This acceptance is significant. It suggests that meaning was not dependent on endurance. The stones mattered while they were needed. After that, they did not need to matter publicly. Leaving them untouched allowed them to remain complete. No one revisited them to reinterpret. No one adjusted their meaning. They were not updated to fit new contexts. They stayed as they were. This prevented distortion. Sometimes preservation alters more than time. Restoration introduces interpretation. Maintenance reshapes intention. Here, untouched meant unchanged. The stones did not evolve. They did not acquire new layers of meaning. They remained fixed in the moment they were released. This stillness preserved integrity without insisting on visibility. Forgetting, if it occurred, was gentle, not forced, not deliberate. It unfolded naturally, and forgetting does not always mean loss. Sometimes it means relief. Relief from attention, relief from explanation, relief from use. The stones were no longer required to perform. They were not required to justify their existence. They were allowed to be silent. This silence endured, not as absence, but as presence without interaction. The stones did not disappear. They remained patient and neutral. They waited without expectation. Not for rediscovery, not for recognition. They waited because waiting is what remains when meaning no longer needs to be active. To forget or to leave untouched may not have been a question for the builders. They may not have distinguished between the two. What mattered was stepping back, allowing the stones to hold their place without continuing to shape behavior. This withdrawal preserved balance. The builders did not cling. They did not resist change. They allowed stillness to settle fully. And in that stillness, the stones remained intact, not as monuments, not as messages, but as something complete enough to no longer require attention. The modern mind arrives with questions, not loudly, not aggressively, but automatically. It looks at a place and asks what it was for. It sees stone and searches for function. It encounters silence and tries to fill it. These expectations are not wrong. They are learned. Modern life teaches us that everything must have a reason, a use, a conclusion. We move through systems designed to explain themselves. Buildings announce their purpose. Objects justify their existence. Stories move toward resolution. This creates comfort. Knowing what something is for reduces uncertainty. It allows control. When we encounter the past, we bring these expectations with us. We look for beginnings and endings. We expect progress. We search for intention that can be named. Göbekli Tepe does not meet these expectations. It does not explain itself. It does not offer instruction. It does not resolve into a story with a clear direction. This creates tension, not because the site is confusing, but because our expectations are active. We want to know why the stones were raised. We want to know what they meant. We want to know what happened next. The modern mind treats unanswered questions as incomplete tasks. It feels compelled to continue, to search, to explain, to decide. But not all spaces were created to satisfy curiosity. Some were created to hold presence. The expectation of explanation comes from a world that measures value through clarity. If something cannot be explained, it feels unfinished. If it cannot be categorized, it feels unstable. If it cannot be summarized, it feels unsatisfying. This response is understandable, but it is not universal. The people who gathered at Göbekli Tepe did not live within systems of documentation. They did not record intent. They did not preserve instruction. Meaning was not stored in words. It was held in repetition, in return, in familiarity. The modern mind often overlooks this. It looks for information instead of rhythm. It looks for answers instead of presence. This creates a mismatch. We arrive expecting explanation and encounter silence. Silence feels like absence when we expect content. But silence can also be fullness when we release expectation. Modern expectations also prioritize utility. We ask what something accomplished. Did it produce food? Did it organize society? Did it lead to settlement? These questions assume that importance is measured through outcome. But not all actions aim to produce results. Some aim to maintain balance. Some aim to mark time without controlling it. Some aim to gather without building permanence. Göbekli Tepe does not offer outcomes. It offers a pattern. People came. They gathered. They left. This cycle did not escalate. It did not expand. It did not transform into something else. From a modern perspective, this can feel incomplete. We expect growth. We expect accumulation. We expect change. When these do not occur, we interpret stillness as stagnation. But stillness can be intentional. It can be a form of completion. The modern mind also seeks ownership. Who built this? Who controlled it? Who decided? We look for leaders, for hierarchies, for authority. These structures help us understand power. But Göbekli Tepe does not reveal power structures. It does not announce leadership. It does not separate participants from observers. This absence unsettles modern frameworks. Without hierarchy, we struggle to assign meaning. Without control, we struggle to explain coordination. Yet coordination occurred. Work was done. Stones were raised. The lack of visible authority does not indicate chaos. It indicates a different organization, one that did not need to be recorded. Modern expectations often assume that complexity requires documentation, that coordination requires command, that meaning requires explanation. Göbekli Tepe challenges this assumption by existing without these markers. The stones stand without telling us how they were decided upon. The carvings appear without explaining why they repeat. The site remains without declaring purpose. This does not mean meaning was absent. It means meaning was not externalized. It did not need to be stored for others. It existed within the experience itself. The modern mind is trained to extract meaning rather than inhabit it. We analyze, we compare, we interpret. These tools are valuable, but they are not always appropriate. Some spaces resist analysis without rejecting presence. Göbekli Tepe is such a space. It does not push back, it simply does not respond. This non-response is not emptiness, it is refusal. Not refusal of understanding, but refusal of explanation. The stones do not answer questions because they were not built to address them. They were built to hold something else, something that does not translate easily into modern categories. When modern expectations soften, something changes. The need to resolve fades. The pressure to explain loosens. The site no longer feels difficult. It feels quiet. This quiet does not demand acceptance. It allows it. The modern mind does not need to be corrected. It needs to be rested. Here, expectations can be placed aside. Questions do not need to be answered. They can be allowed to dissolve. The stones remain whether we understand them or not. They do not respond differently when we explain them. They do not change when we stop trying. This constancy creates calm. The site does not depend on our understanding. It existed long before it was studied. It will remain without resolution. Modern expectations can step back, not because they are wrong, but because they are not required here. Göbekli Tepe does not ask us to understand. It allows us to be present, and presence does not need explanation. Göbekli Tepe often feels difficult, not because it is chaotic, not because it is incomplete, not because it lacks evidence. It feels difficult because it does not behave the way we expect important places to behave. The difficulty does not come from the stones. It comes from the silence between them. Modern understanding relies on structure. We are trained to follow sequences, to identify beginnings, to recognize turning points, to anticipate endings. We expect history to unfold like a line. Göbekli Tepe does not follow a line. There is no clear start, no moment of emergence that explains everything after, no final transformation that resolves the story. The site appears, functions, and withdraws. Without explanation, this absence unsettles the modern mind. We search for a narrative that moves forward. Instead, we find repetition. We look for escalation. Instead, we find balance. We look for cause and effect. Instead, we encounter coexistence. Göbekli Tepe does not guide interpretation. It does not introduce itself. It does not label its components. The stones do not announce meaning. The carvings do not clarify intent. This lack of instruction creates discomfort, not because the site is unclear, but because it refuses to assist. Modern spaces are designed to explain themselves. Signs guide movement. Labels identify purpose. Layouts imply use. Göbekli Tepe offers none of this. It does not tell us where to stand. It does not tell us what to notice first. It does not tell us what matters more. Everything exists on the same level. This equality removes hierarchy, and without hierarchy, interpretation feels unanchored. The modern mind prefers anchors. We ask, what was this place for? But Göbekli Tepe does not align with function. It is not a settlement. It is not a burial ground in the conventional sense. It is not clearly a temple as later cultures define temples. Each category fails slightly. This partial fit creates friction. We attempt to place the site into familiar frames, and it resists, not aggressively, simply by not matching. The difficulty deepens when we consider timing. Göbekli Tepe predates writing, agriculture, and permanent cities. It exists before systems that we rely on to explain complexity. This challenges assumptions. We are accustomed to associating large-scale construction with settled life, with surplus, with hierarchy. Göbekli Tepe disrupts this association. It shows coordination without settlement. It shows planning without permanence. It shows continuity without progression. This contradiction unsettles linear thinking. The modern mind attempts to resolve contradiction by explanation. It asks, how was this possible? And when clear answers do not appear, frustration emerges. But frustration here is not a signal of failure. It is a signal of mismatch. Göbekli Tepe does not fail to explain itself. It simply does not participate in explanation. The difficulty also arises from the site's restraint. There is no excess, no decoration meant to impress, no monumentality meant to dominate. The stones are large, but not theatrical. The carvings are detailed, but not narrative. Nothing overwhelms. This subtlety is difficult to process. Modern spectacle teaches us to recognize importance through intensity. Here, importance is quiet. It does not announce itself. It requires a different kind of attention, one that does not search for payoff, one that does not expect revelation. Another source of difficulty is the site's refusal to justify itself. Göbekli Tepe does not show evidence of practical benefit. It does not improve survival directly. It does not secure resources. It does not protect inhabitants. This challenges modern logic, which often ties effort to utility. We ask why so much work would be invested without clear gain. The answer may be that gain was not measured in the same way, but this answer itself feels incomplete to modern thinking. We want metrics. We want outcomes. We want proof of success. Göbekli Tepe does not offer these. It does not argue for its importance. It does not demonstrate value. It simply remains. This quiet persistence is difficult to accept because it does not negotiate. The site does not care whether it is understood. It does not adjust itself to interpretation. It remains neutral. This neutrality removes feedback. We do not receive confirmation that our explanations are correct. Without confirmation, the modern mind continues searching. But the site does not respond. Eventually, this search exhausts itself, and in that exhaustion, difficulty dissolves. When explanation is no longer demanded, the site becomes less difficult. Not because answers appear, but because questions soften. The stones do not change. Our posture toward them does. Göbekli Tepe is difficult only when we insist that it should explain itself. When we allow it to remain silent, it becomes simple. Not simple to understand. Simple to be with. The difficulty was never in the place. It was in the expectation that everything must be resolved. Göbekli Tepe does not resolve, and that may be the point. Not knowing is often treated as a problem. Something to solve, something to eliminate. Modern life trains us to reduce uncertainty. We collect information. We organize data. We connect evidence. Knowledge becomes reassurance. When something cannot be known, tension appears. The mind remains active. It circles. It insists. Göbekli Tepe does not resolve this tension. It allows uncertainty to remain. And this is uncomfortable only if we resist it. The people who gathered here did not operate within a framework that demanded explanation. They did not record conclusions. They did not define meaning in words, not because they lacked ability, but because they did not require it. Knowledge was not accumulated, it was lived. Understanding did not exist as a separate activity. It was embedded in repetition. Walking the same paths, standing in the same enclosures, returning to the same place. What was known did not need to be articulated. It did not need to be stored. It was carried. Modern thinking often assumes that what is not recorded is lost, that what cannot be explained cannot be held. But there are other forms of knowing. Knowing that does not announce itself. Knowing that does not resolve into clarity. Knowing that remains implicit. Göbekli Tepe preserves this form. It does not offer instruction manuals. It does not present codified systems. Instead, it allows presence without explanation. Living with what is not known does not mean ignoring uncertainty. It means allowing it without urgency. The stones do not demand interpretation. They do not challenge the observer. They do not provoke inquiry deliberately. They simply remain. This remaining creates space. Space where questions do not need answers. Space where uncertainty does not threaten stability. The modern mind often equates uncertainty with vulnerability. If something is not known, it feels unsafe. But here, uncertainty is neutral. Nothing collapses because answers are missing. Nothing becomes unstable. The site stands complete without explanation. This suggests a different relationship between knowledge and security. Security did not depend on understanding. It depended on rhythm, on return, on familiarity. The stones did not need to be explained to be meaningful. They needed to be encountered. Modern inquiry often approaches the past as a puzzle. Each piece must fit. Each gap must be closed. Göbekli Tepe resists this approach by offering no edge pieces. There is no frame to complete. This can feel frustrating. But frustration emerges only when completion is expected. If expectation is released, uncertainty softens. Not knowing becomes space rather than absence. This space is calming. It allows the mind to stop working. It allows attention to settle without direction. Living with what is not known does not require surrender. It requires trust. Trust that meaning does not disappear when clarity is absent. Trust that experience itself can hold value. The builders did not seem concerned with future understanding. They did not anticipate interpretation. They did not leave signs for those who would come later. This suggests confidence. Confidence that what mattered did not need to be translated. It could remain unspoken. Uncertainty here is not an obstacle. It is a boundary that protects the site from misuse. Without fixed explanations, the stones cannot be reduced. They cannot be repurposed easily. They remain open without becoming owned. This openness is preserved by not knowing. The lack of certainty keeps the site intact. Modern explanations often fix meaning. They narrow interpretation. They close possibility. Here, possibility remains wide because nothing is finalized. Living with what is not known means allowing incompleteness. Not every question needs resolution. Not every silence needs filling. The stones do not invite guessing. They invite stillness. They allow the observer to exist alongside uncertainty without engaging it. This coexistence is rare. Modern life rarely allows pause without direction. Here, pause is natural. Not knowing does not interrupt rest. It enables it. When questions soften, attention slows. The body responds. Breathing deepens. Muscles release. The mind stops scanning for answers. This is not ignorance. It is rest. Göbekli Tepe holds this rest without instruction. It does not teach how to let go. It simply demonstrates that letting go is possible. Living with what is not known does not require acceptance of mystery. It requires acceptance of limits. Limits of interpretation, limits of knowledge. These limits do not diminish the site. They define its quiet strength. The stones remain whether they are explained or not. They do not become more meaningful through certainty. They remain sufficient in their silence. And silence, when allowed, does not demand completion. It allows presence. Explanation is a habit. It forms quietly, almost without notice. From early on, we are taught to ask why something exists, why it looks the way it does, why it happened. These questions are not wrong. They help us navigate the world. They reduce confusion. They create structure. But over time, explanation becomes expectation. We assume that everything should be explainable, and when it is not, unease appears. Göbekli Tepe does not respond to this expectation. It does not resist explanation. It simply does not provide it. This absence is not neglect. It is restraint. The stones do not hide answers. They do not withhold information. They were never designed to explain themselves. Explanation belongs to systems that aim to instruct, to persuade, or to record. Here, none of those aims appear. The site does not guide behavior. It does not teach doctrine. It does not demand understanding. It exists without commentary. Modern thinking often assumes that meaning emerges through explanation, that once something is explained, it becomes valuable. But explanation is not the only path to meaning. Some meanings are experiential. They are felt rather than understood. They do not resolve into statements. They do not translate into clarity. Göbekli Tepe operates within this register. It does not offer answers because answers were not required. The gatherings did not depend on instruction. People did not arrive to learn. They arrived to participate. Participation does not require explanation. It requires presence. The stones did not explain why people gathered. They did not define what the gathering meant. They allowed the gathering to occur. This allowance is subtle. It removes pressure. Without explanation, there is no correct interpretation. Without interpretation, there is no hierarchy of understanding. No one knows more because no one is told anything. This equality is calming. Explanation often creates division. Those who understand feel secure. Those who do not feel excluded. Here, no one is excluded. The site does not reward knowledge. It does not punish ignorance. It simply remains. Modern discomfort arises when explanation is withheld. We assume something is missing, but nothing is missing here. What is absent is the demand to explain. This absence frees attention. The mind no longer needs to evaluate. It no longer needs to compare interpretations. It no longer needs to arrive at a conclusion. It can rest. Not everything needs to be explained because explanation is not always helpful. Sometimes it interrupts experience. It shifts focus from being present to being correct. Göbekli Tepe does not support correctness. It does not validate interpretations. It does not confirm or deny hypotheses. It remains neutral. This neutrality is powerful. It prevents closure. And without closure, attention remains open. Open attention is softer. It does not grasp. It does not hold tightly. It allows. The site does not tell us what to think. It does not shape belief. It does not frame understanding. This absence of instruction creates a quiet trust. Trust that presence is enough. The stones were not meant to be understood from a distance. They were meant to be encountered. Encounter does not require explanation. It requires time, standing, waiting, returning. These actions carry meaning without translating into language. Modern explanation often seeks to finalize. Once explained, a thing is considered complete. But Göbekli Tepe resists completion. It remains open-ended. This openness is not failure, it is design. Not a design that planned interpretation, but one that avoided fixing meaning. By not explaining itself, the site avoids being reduced. It cannot be summarized easily. It cannot be simplified. It remains intact because it resists definition. This resistance is gentle. It does not challenge the observer. It simply does not engage. And in that disengagement, something shifts. The need to understand loses urgency. The need to explain loses relevance. The stones do not ask for comprehension. They do not seek validation. They are complete without response. This completeness is restful. It allows the modern mind to release effort, to stop searching, to stop resolving. Not everything needs to be explained because explanation is not always the goal. Sometimes the goal is continuity. Sometimes it is balance. Sometimes it is rest. Göbekli Tepe offers this rest by refusing explanation. It does not challenge curiosity. It outlasts it. And when curiosity fades, what remains is quiet. A quiet that does not demand understanding. A quiet that allows presence without interpretation. A quiet that remains whether we explain it or not. What remains, when explanation is no longer needed, is not emptiness. It is inheritance. Not an inheritance of facts or instructions or conclusions, but an inheritance of posture. A way of standing in the world without demanding it speak back. Göbekli Tepe does not pass down answers. It passes down restraint. It shows that a place can matter without asserting meaning, that a structure can endure without continuing to act. This is not a lesson in the modern sense. It does not instruct. It does not advise. It does not tell us how to live. It simply remains as it is. This remaining is the inheritance. A reminder that not everything important needs to be active. Not everything valuable needs to be visible. The stones were not meant to carry messages forward. They were not prepared for audiences. They were not shaped to be interpreted centuries later. They were shaped to hold a moment. When that moment passed, they were released. This release was not loss. It was completion. The inheritance is found in this completion, in the ability to stop, to end without explanation, to withdraw without regret. Modern culture often struggles with endings. We seek closure through explanation. We summarize, we archive, we memorialize. We attempt to preserve meaning by keeping it present. Göbekli Tepe demonstrates a different approach. Meaning was not preserved by display. It was preserved by letting go. The stones were not asked to continue performing. They were not asked to justify their existence. They were allowed to rest. This rest is quiet. It does not call attention. It does not demand reflection. It does not insist on remembrance. It simply holds space. The inheritance here is not knowledge. It is permission. Permission to allow things to remain unresolved. Permission to accept that some experiences do not translate. Permission to trust that meaning can exist without explanation. This trust is rare. It requires confidence that the world does not collapse when clarity is absent. The builders seemed to have this confidence. They did not secure memory. They did not fear forgetting. They allowed time to carry what remained. The stones did not resist this. They did not demand to be seen. They did not seek recognition. They were content to remain part of the hill. This contentment is subtle. It is not passive. It is neutral. It does not cling. It does not withdraw sharply. It simply stays. A silent inheritance does not instruct future generations. It does not tell them what to believe or how to behave. It offers something gentler, a way of being that does not depend on control. Modern minds often inherit narratives, stories that frame understanding. Göbekli Tepe offers no narrative. It offers atmosphere. The atmosphere of restraint, of calm decision, of completion without announcement. This atmosphere carries forward even without explanation. It reaches the present without changing form, not because it was preserved deliberately, but because it was left alone. This untouched quality allowed it to endure, not as monument, but as presence. The inheritance is not dramatic. It does not transform the observer. It does not reveal secrets. It does not resolve questions. It softens them. And softness is enough. The stones do not compete with modern understanding. They do not argue. They do not insist. They simply exist alongside it. This coexistence is the inheritance, the ability to exist without explanation, to allow meaning without defining it, to let things matter without holding on to them. This inheritance does not ask to be carried actively. It does not require effort. It becomes available when effort stops, when questions slow, when expectation releases. In this state, the site no longer feels distant. It feels quiet, and quiet does not separate. It allows proximity without engagement. The stones do not ask to be understood. They ask nothing. And in asking nothing, they offer rest. The inheritance is not about Göbekli Tepe as an object. It is about a relationship. A relationship with time that does not rush, with meaning that does not demand articulation, with memory that does not insist on preservation. This relationship remains available, not because it was transmitted deliberately, but because it was not controlled. The stones did not explain, they did not instruct, they did not resolve. They allowed silence to do the work. This silence reaches forward without effort. It reaches the present without needing translation. It remains intact because it does not resist. A silent inheritance does not change us. It meets us where we are and leaves us as we are, rested. The hill does not respond. It does not adjust itself to questions asked centuries later. It does not clarify. It does not correct. It remains, not as a mystery to be solved, but as a place that never required explanation. The stones rest beneath the surface, unchanged by curiosity, unaffected by interpretation. They are not hidden. They are simply not present. This absence is not loss. It is quiet. The hill does not wait because it expects something. It waits because waiting is what remains when nothing needs to happen. Time passes without instruction here. Seasons move. Wind crosses the land. Night returns. Nothing is required of the place. Nothing is asked of it. The people who once gathered here did not leave messages behind. They did not ask to be remembered. They did not request understanding. They allowed the place to return to itself. And in doing so, they allowed silence to take over. This silence is not empty. It is full of restraint, of choices not explained, of actions completed without announcement. The hill does not speak because it has nothing left to say. It does not teach. It does not warn. It does not guide. It simply remains available to those who arrive without expectation, those who do not ask what it means, those who do not demand that it explain itself. In that stillness, the modern urge to understand softens. Questions slow. Attention widens. The need to resolve begins to fade. Nothing here needs to be held. Nothing needs to be concluded. The stones are not waiting to be discovered again. They are not waiting to be interpreted correctly. They are not waiting for recognition. They are waiting because waiting is neutral. It does not pull forward. It does not push away. It allows time to pass without resistance. The hill still waits, not for us, not for answers, but because it was never meant to move. As night settles, the land grows quiet again. The same quiet that once surrounded the gatherings. The same quiet that followed departure. The same quiet that allowed the stones to rest. Nothing has changed. And nothing needs to. The hill remains. And in its remaining, it offers something rare, a space where nothing is required, a space where explanation is unnecessary, a space where presence is enough. You do not need to remember this place. You do not need to understand it. You do not need to carry anything forward. The hill does not ask. It waits, and waiting is complete.